"It still hurts," Black Girl cried. The Amish man lifted her dress and froze. A bitter wind sweeps across a lonely barn on the edge of town. Inside, a young girl shivers, her voice breaking as she begs for mercy. The plain-spoken farmer reaches to help her, but what he sees beneath her torn dress nearly stops his heart. She isn't just hurt. She carries scars the law refuses to see, proof of a crime the powerful want buried. And the moment he chooses to protect her, the church bell tolls, the sheriff's boots strike the boardwalk, and the whole town turns against them. But hidden in her pain lies a secret that could change everything. Land, water, justice itself. And the more he stands by her side, the more danger comes pounding at his door. When mercy risks ruin and silence means betrayal, what will they choose? To bow before fear, or to fight for the truth no one else dares to face? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The autumn wind whistled through the barn slats, carrying the bite of early frost. Tony's lantern cast dancing shadows across the wooden beams as he worked, the familiar scents of hay and horse leather wrapping around him like a well-worn quilt. His strong hands moved steadily, brushing down his bay mare for the night, each stroke a meditation that kept his mind from wandering to old sorrows. A soft thud at the barn door broke his evening routine. At first he thought it might be an injured calf, but then he heard it, a whimper, human and filled with pain. "It still hurts," came the whisper, barely louder than the wind. Tony set down his brush and lifted his lantern, its light falling on a crumpled form in the doorway. A young colored woman lay there, her dress torn and muddy, one shoe nearly falling apart. Her eyes, when they met his, held such raw fear that Tony felt his chest tighten. "Please," she whispered. "Just warmth. That's all I ask." Tony stood frozen, his Amish upbringing warring with the sight before him. Since losing Rachel, he'd kept to himself, finding peace in solitude. But this woman's need spoke to something deeper than his grief. "I won't harm you, miss," he said softly, setting the lantern down and approaching slowly, like he would a spooked horse. "I'm Tony Stultzfus. This here's my barn." She tried to push herself up, but collapsed again with a cry of pain. Tony didn't hesitate this time. He gathered her into his arms, noting how little she weighed, how she trembled against him. "Name's Chloe," she managed between chattering teeth. "Chloe Mayfield." Tony carried her to the clean hay he kept for his horses, laying her down gentle as he could. But even that careful movement drew another pained gasp from her lips. In the better light, he could see dark stains on the back of her dress. "Miss Mayfield, you're hurt?" "I need to see how bad." She stiffened, but gave a slight nod. With careful hands, Tony lifted the edge of her dress, expecting perhaps cuts or bruises. What he saw made his blood run cold. Cruel welts crossed her back, some old and scarred white, others angry red and fresh. But what stopped his breath entirely was the brand, a cattle mark, burned into human flesh as if she were nothing more than property. The skin around it was blistered and weeping, evidence that this horror was recent. Tony stumbled back, his hand covering his mouth. In all his years, through all the hardships he'd seen, nothing had prepared him for such deliberately inflicted suffering. His peaceful beliefs had always guided him to turn the other cheek, to withdraw from conflict. But this was evil, plain and simple. Chloe curled in on herself, trying to hide the marks of her abuse. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have come." "I'll go dash." "No." Tony's voice was firm but gentle. "You'll stay right here where it's safe." He pulled off his wool coat and draped it over her, then gathered clean rags and the jar of healing salve he kept for the horses. "I'm going to tend those wounds, if you'll let me. Then we'll get you something warm to drink." As he worked with careful hands to clean and dress her injuries, Tony's mind was racing. Whoever had done this would surely be looking for her. His isolated farm might buy them some time, but not much. Still, as he watched Chloe finally relax slightly under the warm coat, he knew with absolute certainty that he would protect her, whatever the cost. He'd chosen solitude after Rachel died, believing it would shield him from more pain. But seeing Chloe's suffering had awakened something he thought long buried, a fierce need to stand against injustice, no matter how it might disturb his careful peace. "Rest now," he told her softly, adjusting the coat to better cover her shoulders. "You're safe here tonight." The words were a promise, to her, to himself, and to the God he served. Whatever came next, he would not turn away. The lantern light flickered low as the wind continued its mournful song outside. In its gentle glow, Tony kept his vigil, watching over the wounded woman who had stumbled into his life and shattered his carefully maintained isolation. The night ahead would be long, but he was determined to see her through it. Dawn crept over the Colorado highlands, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The crisp morning air carried the comforting scent of wood smoke from Tony's small farmhouse chimney. Chloe stirred beneath the thick quilt Tony had draped over her during the night, her body stiff from sleeping on the barn's hay. For a moment, panic gripped her as she remembered where she was. The barn's weathered walls rose around her, unfamiliar, yet somehow less threatening than the fine walls of the ranch house she'd fled. Still, uncertainty gnawed at her. Would this quiet man's kindness last in the harsh light of day? The barn door creaked open, and Tony entered, carrying a steaming bowl. He moved with careful steps, like someone used to gentling nervous creatures. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, his voice low and steady. "It's just cornmeal mush with milk, but it's hot." Chloe sat up slowly, wincing as the movement pulled at her wounds. "Thank you, Mr. Stoltzfus. I don't mean to be a burden." "Tony," he corrected softly, setting the bowl beside her. "And you're no burden." He settled onto a hay bale nearby, far enough to give her space but close enough to talk. As Chloe ate, savoring each warm spoonful, the words she'd held back began to spill out. "I was born free," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My papa fought in the war, earned his freedom proper. But after he passed, men came saying I owed money for his debts. They took me to the ranch, said I had to work it off." Her hands trembled around the bowl. But the work never ended. And Foreman Holt, Tony's hands clenched in his lap, his Amish teachings of non-violence warring with the anger rising in his chest. But he kept his voice gentle. "You don't have to speak of it." Chloe nodded gratefully. When she finished eating, she insisted on helping with the morning chores. Tony watched as she moved around the barn, sweeping with sure strokes despite her injuries, fetching water from the well with quiet determination. There was a grace to her movements, a dignity that all her suffering hadn't erased. The morning passed in peaceful industry, broken only by the occasional necessary word. Tony found himself drawing comfort from the simple rhythm of shared work, something he hadn't experienced since Rachel's death. But the peace shattered like autumn ice when the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed across the yard. Sheriff Randall Briggs rode up on his dappled grey, his badge catching the morning sun. His face was stern as he dismounted, eyes fixed on Chloe with cold suspicion. "Stoltzfus." He nodded curtly to Tony. "Got word you're harboring a runaway." This one here stole from her rightful employer, money and papers both. His hand rested meaningfully on his gun belt. "Need to take her in." Tony stepped forward, positioning himself between Chloe and the sheriff. She's under my protection, he said, his quiet voice carrying unexpected steel. And she'll stay here until the truth of these claims is proven. The sheriff's face darkened. That's not how this works, Stoltzfus. You're new to these parts, don't understand how things are done. That girl is property of. She's a free woman, Tony cut in, something he rarely did. And she bears marks no human should carry. Behind him, he heard Chloe's sharp intake of breath. You're making a mistake, Briggs growled. Harboring a fugitive makes you complicit. I'll be back with proper charges against both of you. He swung back onto his horse, the movement sharp with anger. Don't try leaving town. Won't end well for either of you. They watched in tense silence as the sheriff rode away, dust rising behind his horse's hooves. When he was gone, Chloe's composure crumbled. I'm so sorry, she whispered, tears tracking down her cheeks. I never meant to bring trouble to your door. I should go before they dash. No. Tony turned to face her, his usually reserved expression filled with quiet determination. What they're doing isn't right. My faith teaches me to stand against injustice, even when it's difficult. He gestured to the barn around them. You're safe here for now. We'll face whatever comes together. Chloe stared at him, wonder mixing with fear in her eyes. Why would you risk so much for a stranger? Tony was quiet for a long moment, looking out across his small farm. Because it's what's right, he said finally. And sometimes doing right is more important than doing what's safe. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the autumn air, but neither of them moved from where they stood, each lost in thoughts of what the sheriff's threats might mean for their future. The evening settled over the farmhouse like a heavy quilt, bringing with it a stillness broken only by the gentle clink of plates and the soft whisper of fabric as Chloe moved about the kitchen. Her hands trembled slightly as she helped Tony prepare their simple supper, the day's confrontation with the sheriff still weighing heavily on her mind. Would you like to learn something useful? Tony asked, breaking the tense silence. The cow needs milking. Chloe nodded, grateful for the distraction. They walked together to the barn, where a gentle brown cow waited in her stall. Tony positioned the wooden stool and demonstrated the proper technique, his weathered hands moving with practiced ease. Like this, he explained, showing her how to grip and pull in a steady rhythm. Gentle but firm. She'll let you know if you're doing it wrong. Chloe settled onto the stool, her movements hesitant at first. The cow shifted, uncertain about this new person, but Tony's steady presence seemed to calm them both. Under his patient guidance, Chloe soon found the right motion, and streams of warm milk hit the bucket with satisfying pings. You have a natural touch, Tony observed quietly. Back in the farmhouse, lamplight cast a warm glow over their simple meal of bread, cheese, and fresh milk. As Chloe cleared the dishes, she began to hum softly, an old hymn that stirred memories of safer days. The melody filled the small space with unexpected beauty. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. The words emerged clear and pure, a heritage passed down from her grandmother's teachings. Tony's hands stilled over his Bible. He hadn't heard such singing since Rachel's passing, and something long dormant stirred in his chest. The familiar ache of loss mingled with an unfamiliar warmth as he listened. When the last note faded, Chloe noticed Tony's expression. My grandmother taught me all the old songs, she explained softly. They gave us hope, even in the darkest times. You sing beautifully, Tony said, his voice rough with emotion. A moment of understanding passed between them, and Chloe gathered her courage. May I ask, why do you live so far from your people? I've heard the Amish stay close together. Tony was quiet for so long that Chloe feared she had overstepped. But then he spoke, his words measured and heavy with memory. My wife, Rachel. She died bringing our first child into the world. The baby too. His hands clasped together tightly. Everywhere in our community I saw her. In the quilts she'd made, the garden she'd planted, the faces of her sisters. Every sympathetic look, every well-meant word of comfort felt like a stone on my chest. He drew a deep breath. So I left. Came west where nobody knew me or my grief. I'm sorry, Chloe whispered. Such loss. It changes you. Yes, Tony agreed softly, though perhaps not always for the better. Chloe traced a pattern on the wooden table. Before coming here, I never knew a man could be gentle. She admitted. My papa was, but he died when I was young. After that, she shuddered slightly. Your kindness is strange to me, like a language I'm just learning to speak. Tony's expression softened with understanding, but before he could respond, a sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. They both tensed, and Tony rose slowly to answer it. A young deputy stood on the porch, looking uncomfortable in the lamplight. Evening, Mr. Stoltzfus. Got a notice for you. He handed over an official-looking paper. You're to appear before Justice Willett tomorrow morning. Charge is harboring a fugitive. Tony accepted the paper with steady hands. I understand. I'll be there. The deputy nodded, clearly relieved to have delivered his message, and quickly mounted his horse to ride away. Chloe had risen from her chair, fear etched across her features. They'll take me back, she whispered. Or worse, they'll put you in jail for helping me. No. Tony's voice was firm as he closed the door. I'll face the charge. Justice Willett is a fair man. He'll hear the truth. But my word against theirs, Chloe's voice cracked. Who will believe a freedwoman over respected ranchers? God knows the truth, Tony said simply, and sometimes he asks us to stand for it, whatever the cost. They stood in the lamplight, the official summons between them like a shadow. Tony moved to extinguish the lamp, and darkness crept into the corners of the room. Neither spoke what they both knew, that the lonely paths they'd walked before now seemed easy compared to the road that lay ahead. The morning sun cast long shadows across Tony's farmyard as he hitched the horses to his wagon. The leather harnesses creaked as he worked, his movements deliberate and practiced. Chloe stood nearby, wringing her hands. I can walk, she offered quietly. No need to risk your wagon being seen with me. Tony shook his head firmly. 2 hours to town is too far to walk. Besides, he added, adjusting the final strap, what's right is right, whether folks like it or not. The wagon wheels groaned as they set out, following the rutted trail toward town. Chloe sat stiffly beside Tony on the wooden seat, her back straight as a fence post. As they climbed higher into the foothills, stands of aspen trees lined their path, their leaves shimmering gold against the crystal blue Colorado sky. I've never seen anything so beautiful, Chloe breathed, momentarily forgetting her fears as a breeze sent yellow leaves dancing through the air. God's artwork, Tony replied softly. We Amish believe in living simply so we can see His glory more clearly. He clicked to the horses, guiding them around a bend. That's why we avoid pride and fancy things. They distract from what matters most. And what matters most? Chloe asked. Peace, truth, caring for others. Tony's hands tightened on the reins. Though sometimes keeping peace means facing hard truths. As they approached town, the clip-clop of hooves on packed earth gave way to the sharper sound of wheels on wooden planks. Chloe felt eyes following their progress down the main street, curtains twitching, shopkeepers pausing in their doorways, women gathering their children closer. The courthouse stood at the center of town, its weathered clapboards a testament to frontier justice. Tony helped Chloe down from the wagon, her legs trembling slightly as her feet touched ground. Inside, Justice Thomas Willett sat behind his desk, his expression neutral as Sheriff Briggs presented his case. "This woman," the sheriff declared, pointing at Chloe, "stole provisions worth $20 from her rightful employer. We demand her immediate arrest." Justice Willett leaned forward, fingers steepled. "That's a serious charge, Sheriff. What evidence do you have of this theft?" "The ranch foreman's word is evidence enough," Briggs blustered. "She ran away in the night." "I was branded like cattle," Chloe's voice rang out, surprising even herself. With shaking fingers, she pulled aside her shawl and collar, revealing the cruel mark burned into her shoulder. A collective gasp filled the room. Several women covered their mouths in horror. Even Justice Willett's composed facade cracked momentarily. "I found her collapsed in my barn," Tony spoke up, his quiet voice carrying authority. "She was injured, hungry, desperate. No thief, a human being fleeing torture." The justice studied them both carefully. "Sheriff, you cannot hold someone on accusations alone. However," he turned to Chloe, "until we can establish your legal status, whether through proof of freedom or a valid labor contract, you remain at risk of arrest if formal charges are filed." "But sir," Chloe started. "That's my ruling for now," Justice Willett said firmly. "You're free to go, but I strongly suggest you obtain documentation of your rights as soon as possible." As they left the courthouse, townspeople lined the boardwalk, their whispers following like autumn leaves in the wind. Some faces showed pity, others scorn. A few women nodded slightly to Chloe in silent support, while several men turned their backs entirely. Chloe held her head high as Tony helped her back into the wagon, though her hands shook as she gripped the seat. The return journey felt longer, the golden aspens now seeming to mock their troubled hearts. That evening, as shadows lengthened across Tony's farm, Chloe sat at the kitchen table, her untouched soup growing cold. "What if they come with papers?" she whispered. "What if they forge a contract?" Tony paused in his evening Bible reading. "Truth is like water," he said slowly. "It finds its way out no matter how folks try to dam it up." He met her worried gaze. "We'll find proof of your freedom. God didn't lead you here to abandon you now." But even as he spoke these reassuring words, Tony felt his own heart waver. The path ahead looked darker than the gathering night outside, and he wondered if his faith alone would be enough to light the way. Days stretched into a gentle routine at Tony's farm. The morning mist would lift to reveal Chloe and Tony working side by side, their movements falling into natural rhythm. The crack of splitting wood echoed across the yard as Tony showed Chloe how to swing the axe properly, his patient instructions matching the steady thump of blade against log. "My father taught me to work hard," Chloe said one morning, pausing to wipe her brow. "He always said freedom meant nothing without land to work." She stacked another split log carefully. "He had papers once, a claim to land under the treaty rights for freedmen who served. But after he died—" Her voice trailed off. Tony nodded, understanding filling the silence. They moved on to mending fences, the wire cool and rough beneath their fingers. The autumn wind carried the sweet scent of hay as they worked, threading new wire where the old had rusted through. In the barn, Tony guided Chloe through the proper care of the animals. She learned quickly, her gentle touch earning the trust of even his most skittish mare. The routine of feeding, grooming, and cleaning stalls became a comfort to them both. One crisp afternoon, Tony was teaching Chloe to use the hand plow in the kitchen garden. The sun warmed their shoulders as he demonstrated how to guide the blade through the soil. "Keep it steady," he explained. "Let the earth tell you how deep to go." The crunch of wagon wheels on the drive interrupted their lesson. Preacher Josiah Carter climbed down from his buggy, his black coat dusted with road dirt. "Brother Stoltzfus," he called. "Miss Mayfield." Tony straightened, noting the thoughtful look in the preacher's eyes. "Welcome, Brother Carter. What brings you out this way?" The preacher approached slowly, his gaze lingering on Chloe. "The name Mayfield has been on my mind since the hearing. Your father, was he Samuel Mayfield?" Chloe's hands tightened on the plow handle. "Yes, sir." "Did you know him?" "Indeed I did. A good man, your father." The preacher adjusted his spectacles. "And if memory serves, there might be papers concerning his land claim in the church archives. Records were kept of such matters, you see." Hope flickered across Tony's face, but Chloe's expression remained guarded. "Papers can disappear," she said softly. "Or be changed." "True enough," Preacher Carter admitted. "But God's truth has a way of persisting. I'll look through the records myself." After the preacher left, Tony noticed Chloe's reluctance to embrace this possibility. "Hope isn't foolishness," he said gently. "It's faith taking root." But trouble was taking root as well. Later that afternoon, a group of townsfolk gathered near the fence line. Their muttered conversations carried on the wind. "Ain't natural. A black girl living with an Amish man? What's he thinking? Bringing scandal like that? Someone ought to do something." Tony watched them from the barn door, his jaw set firm. Chloe pretended not to notice, but her movements grew tighter, more careful as she worked. That evening, as the sun settled behind the mountains, Tony lit the lamp at the supper table. Steam rose from bowls of bean soup, but before they could eat, Tony folded his hands. "We should pray," he said quietly. Chloe hesitated, then bowed her head. Tony's voice filled the kitchen, steady and sure. "Lord, we thank you for this food, for safety, for truth that cannot be buried. Help us remember that your love sees past the color of skin and the whispers of men. Amen." When he looked up, tears were sliding down Chloe's cheeks. She wiped them away quickly with her sleeve. "I'm not used to," she gestured vaguely. "All this quiet faith. My grandmother sang her prayers, loud and strong. But this—" Fresh tears fell. Tony reached across the table, his weathered hand stopping short of touching hers. "Your worth isn't measured by what they say, Chloe. It was set by God long before anyone here drew breath." The night pressed against the windows, bringing with it both the weight of uncertainty and the lightness of possibility. Crickets chirped their evening song as Chloe and Tony ate their soup, each lost in thought about papers that might exist in a church archive and the power they could hold to change everything. Dawn painted the sky in watercolor hues as Tony hitched the wagon. Frost glittered on fence posts and dry grass, warning of the winter to come. Chloe wrapped herself in a borrowed shawl, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. "Ready?" Tony asked, offering his hand to help her up. Chloe nodded, settling beside him on the wooden seat. They rode in companionable silence through fields where farmers worked to bring in the last harvest. Plows cut dark furrows in the earth, and workers stacked corn shocks like teepees against the coming cold. The wagon wheels creaked a steady rhythm over the rutted road. "Your father's name," Tony said finally. "It carries weight with Preacher Carter. I saw it in his eyes yesterday." Chloe smoothed her skirt. "Papa always said to keep records. Paper holds memory better than men. He'd tell me. But after he died..." She swallowed hard. "I never saw any papers myself." The church stood plain against the morning sky, its white clapboard walls gleaming in the autumn light. Preacher Carter met them at the door, keys jangling in his hand. "Follow me," he said, leading them down narrow stairs to the archive room. Musty air and darkness greeted them. The preacher lit an oil lamp, its glow catching dust motes dancing in the air. Wooden shelves lined the walls, stuffed with leather-bound books and yellowed papers. "The church has kept records since the first settlers came," Carter explained, running his finger along spines of ancient ledgers. Births, deaths, marriages, and land claims. He pulled out a thick folder, carefully laying it on a small table. Chloe leaned forward, her heart pounding as the preacher's careful hands sorted through the papers. Tony stood close behind her, his solid presence reassuring. "Here." Carter's voice was quiet but certain. He lifted a document, its edges worn but the writing still clear. A deed dated 1868, granted to Samuel Mayfield, freedman and veteran, 40 acres with natural spring bordered by Cottonwood Creek to the north. Chloe's hands trembled as she took the paper. Her father's signature flowed bold across the bottom, each letter a testament to his determination. "It's real," she whispered. "All his stories about our land, they were true. Your father was a man of vision," Carter said, his expression grave. "But you should know that land sits where the railroad means to lay track. Powerful men have been buying up deeds, some by fair means, others." He let the words hang. Tony's hand found Chloe's shoulder. "The law is clear on property rights. The law is what men make of it out here," Carter warned. "Be careful." The ride home felt different. Possibility and danger twisting together like wind-blown leaves. Chloe held the deed close, wrapped in a shawl. "What would Papa think?" she wondered aloud, "seeing me claim what's ours at last?" "He'd be proud," Tony said simply. "A father's legacy isn't just land, it's the courage to stand for what's right." Evening settled over the farm like a heavy blanket. They had just finished supper when the first shouts came, followed by the thunder of hooves. "Get away from the windows!" Tony ordered, his voice tight. He moved quickly through the house, dropping wooden bars across doors and shutters. Angry voices carried through the walls. "Come out, Stoltzfus! Hand over the girl and them papers!" A rock crashed through glass, sending shards skittering across the floor. Chloe flinched, but didn't cry out. More rocks followed, thudding against wood and breaking windows. Tony's hands shook as he secured the last bar, but his voice remained steady. "They won't come in. They're trying to frighten us." "Why?" Chloe whispered, though she knew. "I've done nothing to them. That land is mine by right." "Fear makes men cruel," Tony replied, "but we'll answer hatred with peace." They sat together in the darkened house, shoulders touching. Chloe began to hum softly, one of her grandmother's hymns. Tony joined in, his deep voice harmonizing with hers. The words spoke of refuge, of shelter in times of storm. Outside, the mob's shouts gradually died away. Horses' hooves retreated into the distance. But the night felt forever changed, marked by the knowledge that some men would rather destroy than see justice done. Chloe clutched the deed, her father's signature a reminder of all that had been won and lost, and might yet be won again. In the darkness, Tony's quiet strength beside her felt like a promise, not of safety, perhaps, but of someone who would stand with her through whatever came. Morning light revealed the mob's anger scattered across the farmyard. Shards of glass glittered like frost in the dirt, and fence posts leaned drunkenly where horses had been tied. Tony stood in the yard, his shoulders slumped as he surveyed the damage. Each broken window, each trampled garden row told a story of hatred he had hoped never to see again. He gathered his tools silently, methodically beginning repairs. The steady rhythm of his hammer spoke of resilience, of rebuilding rather than retreat. Inside the barn, Chloe moved among the animals, her voice soft and soothing. The horses still showed whites of their eyes, and the milk cow refused to settle. "There now," she murmured, stroking the cow's flank. "No harm will come to you." The words were as much for herself as the frightened beast. By midday, Tony had replaced 2 window panes and straightened the worst of the fence damage. Chloe brought him water, then settled on the porch steps. Her voice rose clear and sweet as she practiced her grandmother's hymns, refusing to let fear silence her music. "Will you come to church with me Sunday?" she asked suddenly, watching Tony work. His hand stilled on the fence post. "I haven't. Not since Sarah." He trailed off, pain etching lines around his eyes. "I know," Chloe said gently. "But I need your strength beside me." Tony stood silent for a long moment, sawdust coating his plain black vest. Finally, he nodded. "Yeah, I will come." Sunday dawned clear and cool. They rode to church in Tony's freshly washed wagon, Chloe wearing her cleanest dress, Tony in his best black coat. The small wooden church gleamed white against the autumn sky, its bell calling the faithful to worship. Whispers followed them inside like dry leaves skittering across floorboards. Families shifted in their pews, some turning away, others watching with undisguised curiosity. Tony guided Chloe to a back pew, his presence solid and reassuring beside her. Preacher Carter's eyes found them during the first prayer. When it came time for the hymn, he called out, "Miss Mayfield, would you favor us with a song?" Chloe's heart thundered in her chest as she stood. Her grandmother's voice echoed in memory, teaching her the old songs that had carried their people through darker days than these. The first notes trembled like autumn leaves, but then her voice grew stronger, filling the small sanctuary with pure, clear tones. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. That saved a wretch like me. The familiar words took wing, soaring to the rough-hewn rafters. One by one, heads bowed. Even Justice Willett, seated near the front with his family, closed his eyes in reverence. The last note hung in the air like a prayer. Tony watched her, his chest tight with an unfamiliar feeling. Pride, he realized. Pride and something warmer, something that made his heart beat faster. When Chloe returned to her seat, her cheeks flushed with emotion, he squeezed her hand briefly. After the service, several members of the congregation approached them. Mrs. Miller, the baker's wife, clasped Chloe's hands in her own. "Such a gift," she said warmly. "You must join our choir." Others offered shy smiles or quiet words of welcome. Not all faces showed kindness. The sheriff's family pushed past without a glance, and several men gathered in tight clusters, their expressions dark with disapproval. But Chloe held her head high, drawing strength from the morning's small victories. The ride home felt lighter somehow. Autumn sunlight gilded the fields, and a cool breeze carried the scent of ripening apples from Tony's small orchard. Chloe hummed softly, her spirit more peaceful than it had been since arriving at Tony's farm. That evening, they shared a simple supper of bread, stewed apples, and fresh milk. The repaired windows held back the gathering dark, and lamplight cast warm shadows on the walls. Neither spoke much, but the silence between them felt comfortable, like a well-worn quilt. Looking at Tony across the table, Chloe felt a deep gratitude. This quiet man had given her more than shelter. He had given her the chance to reclaim her dignity, to stand tall despite those who would see her bow. In his steady presence, she found the strength to believe they might weather whatever storms lay ahead. Tony caught her watching him and offered a small smile, rare as a winter robin. The warmth in his eyes spoke of faith rewarded, of loneliness easing its grip one shared meal at a time. Together they had faced the mob's anger and found something stronger than fear, the courage to endure, and perhaps even to hope. Night crept across the farmstead like a thief. The moon hung low, casting long shadows through bare tree branches. Inside the house, Tony and Chloe had just finished clearing away their supper dishes when the first whiff of smoke drifted through the repaired windows. Tony's head snapped up, nostrils flaring. "Something's burning." Before the words left his mouth, an orange glow flickered through the barn's wooden slats. Shadows moved against the light, dark figures darting between the buildings. The sharp scent of kerosene cut through the crisp autumn air. "Fire!" Chloe's scream pierced the night as flames erupted along the barn's outer walls. The dry wood caught quickly, hungry tongues of fire racing up towards the hayloft. They burst out of the house together. Inside the barn, horses screamed and cattle bellowed in terror. Chloe rushed toward the burning building, her heart pounding. "The animals! We have to save them!" Smoke billowed thick and black, stinging her eyes as she fought to reach the stall doors. Her fingers fumbled with the latches while horses kicked frantically against their enclosures. She managed to free two before the smoke overwhelmed her, sending her to her knees in a fit of coughing. "Chloe!" Tony's voice cut through the roar of flames. His strong hands gripped her shoulders, dragging her away from the inferno. "You cannot stay in here." "But the animals!" She choked out between coughs. A crash from above warned of the hayloft's imminent collapse. Tony shoved her towards the door, but as they reached the threshold, dark shapes emerged from the smoke. Two riders, faces hidden by bandanas, swung down from their horses. "Should have minded your own business, Amish man," one growled, advancing with a length of fence post gripped in his fists. Tony pushed Chloe behind him. "Run!" he whispered urgently. "Get help!" The riders attacked without warning. The first swing caught Tony in the ribs with a sickening crack. He stumbled but didn't fall, refusing to fight back as his attacker struck again and again. The second man joined in, fists and boots finding their mark until Tony lay bloodied in the dirt. Chloe screamed, but her voice was lost in the roar of the burning barn. Behind her, the roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. The riders mounted up and vanished into the darkness, leaving destruction in their wake. She ran to Tony's crumpled form, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. Blood trickled from a gash above his eye, and his breathing came in pained gasps. "I am so sorry," she sobbed, cradling his head in her lap. "This is all my fault." Tony's eyes fluttered open, finding hers through the pain. "No," he managed, his voice rough. "The truth must be defended, no matter the cost." With aching gentleness, she helped him to his feet. Together they watched as the barn, Tony's livelihood, burned to ash. The animals they couldn't save had fallen silent. Tools, feed, and shelter for the coming winter, all gone in a matter of minutes. Inside the house, Chloe tended Tony's wounds by lamplight. She cleaned the cuts, bound his bruised ribs, and pressed cool cloths to the worst of the swelling. As she worked, she hummed the hymn from church, her voice trembling but determined. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Tony drifted in and out of consciousness, grimacing with each breath. Every time his eyes opened, he found her there, watching over him with fierce protectiveness. The night stretched endless, marked by the steady drip of water into the wash basin and the soft notes of Chloe's hymn. Dawn broke grey and cold over the smoking ruins. Chloe stood at the window, watching thin wisps rise from the blackened timbers. Without the barn, winter loomed like a giant shadow. No hay stored, no shelter for the surviving livestock, no tools to work the frozen ground. Yet as she looked at Tony's battered face, peaceful now in sleep, something hardened inside her. The men who did this thought to break them, to drive her away with violence and fear. But they had underestimated her. She was her father's daughter, heir to his strength as surely as his land. She would not run. Not this time. Not ever again. Touching the rough timber of the windowsill, Chloe whispered a promise to the rising sun. We will rebuild. Whatever comes, we face it together. Outside, the first frost of winter glazed the burned ground silver, and somewhere in the distance, a lone rooster greeted the morning, defiant and unafraid. The days after the barn burning blurred together in a haze of smoke and worry. Tony lay on his narrow bed, caught in fever's grip, his bruised body fighting to heal. The morning sun filtered through frost-touched windows, catching dust motes in its pale beams as Chloe moved quietly around the small bedroom. She pressed a cool cloth to Tony's forehead, her touch gentle against the purple-black bruising that marked his face. Easy now, she whispered when he stirred restlessly. The fever's got to break soon. In the kitchen, herbs simmered in a pot, yarrow and willow bark that she had gathered from the wood's edge. The bitter tea helped ease Tony's pain, though he could barely sip it through cracked lips. Chloe spooned warm chicken broth into his mouth, supporting his head with careful hands. Between nursing duties, she refused to let the farm fail. Her back ached and her hands blistered as she swung the axe, splitting logs for the woodpile. The work was harder than she had imagined, but each successful strike brought satisfaction. She had watched Tony do this countless times. Now it was her turn to provide. Behind the scorched remains of the barn, she constructed a crude lean-to from salvaged boards and canvas. The 2 surviving horses and 1 milk cow huddled beneath it, their breath making steam in the cold air. I know it ain't much, she told them as she spread fresh straw, but it'll keep the worst weather off. 5 days after the attack, Tony's fever finally broke. He woke to find Chloe dozing in the chair beside his bed, her hands raw from work, her face drawn with exhaustion. You have been caring for everything, he said, his voice hoarse. Chloe started awake. Tony. Thank the Lord. She helped him sit up, propping pillows behind him. How are you feeling? Like every bone aches, he admitted, touching his bandaged ribs. But the fog has lifted. His eyes grew troubled. Without the barn, winter will be hard, perhaps impossible. Which is why we must act, Chloe said firmly. We need to take our case to town. Let the justice hear the truth about my father's land, about what these men did. Tony's face tightened with worry. They have already shown they will use violence. A hearing could bring worse. Or it could bring justice. Chloe sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes bright with determination. I know you believe in peace, Tony. But sometimes peace means standing up to evil, not letting it win through silence. It could mean more harm to you, Tony protested. I already carry their marks. Chloe said quietly. But I won't let fear rule me anymore. Will you help me? Tony studied her face. The strength there, the unwavering resolve. His Amish teachings had always counseled non-resistance, but watching Chloe's courage stirred something deeper. Perhaps true peace meant protecting what was right. Yes, he said finally. We will seek justice together. The next morning, they borrowed paper from the preacher, who came to check on Tony's recovery. Together, they drafted a petition to the justice of the peace, detailing both Chloe's land claim and the violent attack on the farm. The preacher added his own statement, confirming the existence of Samuel Mayfield's deed. Evening settled early, bringing bitter cold. Frost spread delicate patterns across the window panes, while Chloe built up the fire. She stood watching the flames, arms wrapped around herself. What troubles you? Tony asked from his chair by the hearth. I fear. She hesitated. I fear being marked as trouble for the rest of my days. That no matter what the justice decides, people will only see me as the one who brought strife to their town. Tony reached for her hand, his touch gentle. Your scars, the ones they can see and the ones they cannot, they do not define your worth. You are defined by your courage, your kindness, your strength in facing what is wrong. Tears welled in Chloe's eyes. How can you be so sure? Because I see you, Tony said simply. Now, shall we pray together? Chloe knelt beside his chair, their joined hands warm in the firelight. Tony's quiet voice filled the room with words of hope and strength, asking for guidance and protection. As they prayed, Chloe felt peace settle over her like a familiar quilt. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Outside, the winter wind sang through bare branches, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, a lone voice unafraid of the night. Frost-rimed grass crunched beneath the wagon wheels as Tony and Chloe made their way toward town. The morning air bit sharp and clean, carrying wood smoke from distant chimneys. Tony held the reins loose in his bandaged hands, still tender from the beating. Beside him, Chloe sat straight-backed despite her fear, her best dress pressed smooth beneath her worn shawl. They passed the Miller farm, where last spring Tony had helped mend fences. Sarah Miller stood in her dooryard, hanging wash, but when she saw them approach, she hurried inside. Her husband turned his back in the field, deliberately focusing on his work. They fear association with us now, Tony said quietly. Like sickness, they think trouble might spread. Chloe replied, though the rejection stung. The Henderson place was next, where Tony had often traded labor at harvest time. Old Jim Henderson actually spat in the dirt as they passed. His wife pulled their small children behind her skirts, as if sheltering them from something dangerous. Chloe's hands twisted in her lap. Perhaps I should not have asked you to stand with me. Your neighbors are showing who they truly are, Tony finished. Sometimes light must shine on darkness before healing can begin. The courthouse square was already crowded when they arrived. Townsfolk clustered in small groups, voices hushed as Tony helped Chloe down from the wagon. She kept her head high, though whispers followed them up the wooden steps. Inside, the hearing room's hard benches were packed. The sheriff stood near the justice's desk, thumbs hooked in his gun belt, while Calvin Holt, the ranch foreman, lounged against the wall with a handful of his men. Their eyes tracked Chloe with predatory interest. The justice called the room to order, his gavel sharp against old wood. Sheriff Briggs stepped forward first, his badge catching the pale sunlight from tall windows. This woman is a thief and vagrant, he declared. She ran from legitimate employment, taking valuable property. Now she corrupts a peaceful man with her lies. Holt pushed off the wall, his voice carrying cruel amusement. She's got no standing here. No rights to land or liberty, just a troublemaker who needs to learn her place. Murmurs of agreement rippled through part of the crowd. Chloe's shoulders tensed, but she didn't flinch. Mr. Stoltzfus, the justice said. You wish to speak? Tony rose slowly, pain evident in his careful movements. The room hushed, unused to hearing the quiet Amish man's voice in public. I found her collapsed in my barn, he began, each word clear and measured. When I lifted her dress to tend her wounds, I saw... His voice caught, then steadied. I saw scars from whipping. Fresh burns where she had been branded like cattle. No human being deserves such treatment. Gasps and shocked whispers filled the room. Several women pressed handkerchiefs to their mouths. Even the justice's face paled. Chloe stood, trembling but determined, beside Tony. Her presence seemed to draw strength from his testimony, though tears shone in her eyes. That's lies, Holt snarled, starting forward. You can't prove. I can speak to truth here. A new voice cut through the tension. Near the back, an elderly man in a faded blue coat rose stiffly. White-haired and weathered, he leaned on a wooden cane. Name's Jacob Wheeler, formerly Sergeant Union Army. He made his way forward, each step deliberate. I served with Samuel Mayfield, this girl's father. Good man, brave soldier. I was there when he received the land grant papers, signed and proper. That parcel with the spring was his by right of service and treaty. The room erupted in competing voices. The justice pounded his gavel for order. You expect us to believe some ancient soldier's memory? The sheriff demanded. Wheeler's spine straightened, old dignity rising. I expect you to believe these. He pulled yellowed papers from his coat. Copies I kept, knowing someday they might matter. Samuel asked me to witness his claim. I've carried that duty 30 years. He laid the documents on the justice's desk. The old man's hands trembled slightly, but his voice remained firm. That land belongs to his heir, and any man who'd brand a free woman deserves worse than jail. The room divided in mutters and movements, some nodding, others scowling. The justice studied the papers carefully before looking up. These documents require verification, he announced. I will delay final judgment until their authenticity is confirmed. Until then, Miss Mayfield remains under the protection of this court. His gavel fell with finality. Outside, anger simmered in the autumn air. You'll regret this, one of Holt's men growled as they passed. Both of you. But Chloe felt something new beneath her fear, a flutter of hope, fragile as a bird's wing. She wasn't alone anymore. Finally, someone besides Tony had spoken for justice. Wheeler caught up to them by the wagon. Your father was a good man, he told Chloe softly. He'd be proud to see you standing tall. Tears spilled down Chloe's cheeks as she squeezed the old soldier's gnarled hand. For the first time, she felt her father's legacy as more than just a dream. Autumn whined, scattered ash and debris across the scorched earth where the barn had stood. Tony and Chloe worked side by side in the crisp morning air, clearing twisted metal and charred timber. Each piece they moved revealed another layer of destruction, but also possibility. We'll set the new foundation here, Tony said, driving a wooden stake into the ground. His hands, still healing from the beating, moved with careful purpose. The old barn faced south. Perhaps this one should too. Chloe nodded, wiping soot from her forehead. Good for winter sun, she agreed, remembering her father's teachings about working the land. The memory brought both warmth and ache. They worked through the morning, marking corners with stakes and twine. The rhythm of shared labor eased their worried thoughts about the justice's investigation. When they broke for water, Tony settled on an overturned bucket. In our ways, he began softly, forgiveness is not just words. It must live in actions. He traced patterns in the ash with his boot. When I left my community after Sarah died, I thought I was forgiving God, but really I was running from pain. Chloe sat beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. My father used to say forgiveness is like clearing new ground, hard work that bears fruit later. She gazed across the damaged field. He dreamed of land where all children could grow up free. No masters, no brands, no fear. Tony's hand found hers briefly, a gentle pressure of understanding. The touch sent warmth through them both, though neither spoke of it. They worked until sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. As they gathered their tools, hoofbeats approached. A rider appeared, young Billy from the telegraph office, his face bright with importance. Message for Miss Mayfield, he announced, holding out a yellow envelope. From the territorial capital. Chloe's hands trembled as she took it. Tony stood close, offering silent support as she unfolded the paper. "The deed," her voice caught. "It's real. The land grant is confirmed as authentic." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "My father's dream wasn't just a story." Tony squeezed her shoulder gently. "This is good news, but stay watchful. Men like Holt and his friends won't easily give up power." "I know," Chloe whispered. "But for now, can we just be glad?" That evening, they built a small fire outside the house. The night air carried the scent of pine and coming frost. Above them, stars blazed in endless patterns across the dark sky. They sat together on a fallen log, the flames painting their faces in shifting light and shadow. "I never thought I'd feel at home anywhere again," Chloe said softly, watching sparks rise toward the stars. "After what happened at the ranch, I thought I'd always be running." Tony added a stick to the fire, considering his words carefully. "When Sarah died, I believed my heart died too. That's why I came west, to be alone with my grief." He paused, his voice growing gentle. "I was wrong." Chloe turned to look at him, reading in his face what neither yet dared speak aloud. The firelight caught the silver threading through his dark beard, the kindness in his eyes. Something deeper than friendship hummed between them, strong and tender as a hymn. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance. The night wrapped around them like a quilt, stars wheeling overhead. Though the future still held uncertainty, in that moment they were anchored by shared purpose and growing love. The fire crackled softly, sending up sparks that merged with the stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they could rest in the peace of truth, confirmed and hope renewed. Their shoulders touched lightly as they gazed into the flames, each finding in the other's presence a home they thought lost forever. Morning frost coated the wagon wheels as Tony and Chloe drove into town. The courthouse square was already crowded, faces both friendly and hostile turning to watch their arrival. Chloe gripped her father's deed tightly, the paper crackling in her trembling hands. "The Lord goes before us," Tony said quietly, helping her down from the wagon. They climbed the courthouse steps between whispers and stares. Inside, the wooden benches creaked under the weight of what seemed like half the town. The air hung heavy with tobacco smoke and tension. Sheriff Briggs stood near the front, his badge gleaming dully in the morning light. Beside him, Ranch Foreman Holt's face was dark with barely contained fury. Justice Willett entered, his black robes sweeping the floor as he took his seat. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock and the rustle of papers. "This hearing concerns the land claim of Miss Chloe Mayfield," the justice announced, his voice carrying to the rafters. He lifted the verified deed, studying it carefully before reading aloud. "By authority of the United States government, granted to Samuel Mayfield, veteran of the Union Army, 160 acres, including the Western Spring and accompanying water rights." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Holt surged forward, his face mottled red. "This is nonsense. That land belongs to the ranch by right of improvement." "Silence!" Justice Willett commanded, rapping his gavel. "I have here sworn statements from the territorial capital confirming this deed's authenticity." Sheriff Briggs shouldered through the crowd. "Your Honor, this woman is wanted for theft. Any claim she makes is worthless." "I have evidence of a different theft," a new voice called out. The elderly veteran who had spoken at the previous hearing stood, leaning on his cane. "I served with Samuel Mayfield. I was there when that land was granted. But more than that, I witnessed Sheriff Briggs and Foreman Holt plotting to seize these water rights for the railroad's benefit." The room erupted in shocked whispers. The veteran continued. "They knew about the deed all along. They burned it from the county records themselves, thinking no other copy existed." Lies! Holt snarled, but his face had gone pale. 2 more men stood, ranch hands with conscience weighing heavy. It's true, one said. We heard them planning it. They meant to sell the spring rights to the railroad for a tidy profit. Justice Willett's gavel cracked like thunder. Order! I have heard enough. His stern gaze swept the room. The evidence is clear. This deed is legitimate, and Miss Mayfield is the rightful heir to her father's land. Furthermore, Sheriff Briggs and Foreman Holt will face investigation for conspiracy and corruption. No! Holt roared. He lunged forward, reaching for Chloe with rage-twisted features. But Tony stepped between them, standing firm though unarmed. The room exploded into chaos. Several men surged forward, some to attack, others to defend. But before violence could erupt, something remarkable happened. Mrs. Peterson, who had wept at Chloe's hymn in church, planted herself beside Tony. The preacher joined them, then the veteran, and soon a wall of townspeople stood protecting Chloe. Enough! Justice Willett thundered. This ruling stands. Miss Mayfield owns the land. Any who contest this will answer to territorial law. Sheriff Briggs backed away, his authority crumbling as deputies exchanged uncertain glances. Holt stormed out, leaving threats hanging in his wake. But for the first time, Chloe stood straight and unafraid, a landowner rather than a fugitive. As the crowd dispersed, people who had once turned away now came to shake her hand. Welcome home, Mrs. Peterson said, squeezing her fingers warmly. The preacher offered a blessing, and the veteran saluted, honoring her father's memory. The drive home felt different, as if the very landscape had transformed. Golden afternoon light spilled across the hills that were now truly hers. Chloe breathed deeply of the autumn air, her father's dream alive in every breath. At the top of the ridge overlooking the spring, Tony halted the wagon. The vast Colorado sky stretched endless above them, clouds sailing like ships of hope across the blue. Thank you, Lord, Chloe whispered, tears gleaming in her eyes. Thank you for keeping Papa's promise. She touched the deed in her pocket, no longer just paper, but proof that justice could prevail. Tony watched her quiet joy, his own heart full of wonder at how God's paths unfolded. The land before them waited, ready for new life to take root where old wounds had been. Just as winter would eventually yield to spring, so too had darkness given way to light. The first snow dusted the Colorado highlands as hammers rang out across Tony's farmstead. Kind neighbors, those whose hearts had been touched by Chloe's courage, worked alongside them, raising sturdy beams for the new barn. The structure grew day by day, its fresh-cut timber reaching towards the winter sky. Mrs. Peterson brought stew and cornbread to the workers, her once suspicious eyes now warm with admiration. The Lord works in mysterious ways, she said, watching Chloe direct the placement of roof boards. Who'd have thought such beauty could rise from ashes? The barn they built stood larger than the old one, with room for more animals and storage space for winter feed. Tony had designed it himself, incorporating wisdom from his Amish upbringing. His quiet leadership drew respect from the workers, who saw in him a strength that needed no violence to prove itself. As December's chill settled in, the farmstead glowed with newfound warmth. Lamplight spilled from windows onto fresh snow, and smoke curled from the chimney into star-filled nights. Inside, Chloe tended to both hearth and hope, transforming the once lonely house into a home. Word of her father's spring spread through territories where water meant life itself. First came 2 freedmen families, their wagons loaded with dreams of their own land. Chloe welcomed them with tears of joy, sharing both water rights and farming knowledge she'd learned from Tony. Then arrived a native family, displaced by broken treaties, seeking temporary shelter. Tony helped them build a sturdy cabin near the spring, his actions speaking louder than his sparse words. The children soon ran laughing between the buildings, their play bridging ancient divisions. Each evening, as twilight painted the sky in purple and gold, the growing community gathered around fires to share meals and stories. Chloe's voice led them in hymns that echoed across the valleys, songs of deliverance that drew more seekers to their light. "My father dreamed of this," she told Tony one evening as they watched children chase fireflies near the spring, not just owning land, but sharing its blessings. Tony nodded, his eyes soft in the firelight. Though they rarely spoke of their deepening feelings, love showed in every shared glance, every brush of hands during prayer, every quiet moment of understanding. Their bond had been forged in fire and strengthened by shared purpose. The farmstead that had once known only solitude now hummed with life. Neighbors who came to visit often stayed to help, drawn by the spirit of genuine community. Gardens were planned for spring, wells were dug, and fences mended. Even the local preacher remarked that heaven seemed closer here, where former strangers became family through faith and shared labor. Around the evening fires, stories flowed like the spring itself, tales of struggle and survival, of God's faithfulness through dark times. Laughter rang out where silence had once reigned, and prayers rose up with the smoke into the vast Colorado night. The warmth of these gatherings seemed to push back the winter cold, creating a haven of hope for all who came seeking refuge. The evening before Christmas settled softly over the Colorado highlands, snowflakes drifting like feathers from a pewter sky. Inside Tony's farmhouse, warmth and light pushed back the gathering dark. The hearth crackled with pine logs, casting dancing shadows on walls that had once known only silence. Around the room, new friends and neighbors filled every chair and corner. Mrs. Peterson rocked a sleeping baby while her husband traded stories with two hawks, whose family had found shelter here 2 weeks past. Children sprawled on quilts near the fire, their eyes bright with wonder as they practiced hymns for tomorrow's celebration. Sarah, a freedwoman whose family now lived near the spring, pulled fresh bread from the Dutch oven, its yeasty aroma mixing with the scent of pine boughs and cinnamon. Her daughter helped pass around tin plates filled with roasted venison and winter vegetables, gifts from the community's shared harvest. Chloe moved among their guests with quiet grace, her smile reflecting the firelight. Gone was the frightened woman who had collapsed in Tony's barn months ago. In her place stood someone transformed by love and acceptance, her bearing both gentle and strong. Tony watched her from his wooden chair by the hearth, his heart full. When she caught his eye, their shared glance held volumes of unspoken understanding. He reached beneath his chair and withdrew a small package wrapped in clean muslin. The room grew quiet as he stood, save for the pop and hiss of burning logs. "Chloe," he said, his voice soft but carrying. "I made something for you." She crossed to him, curious. As she unwrapped the muslin, her breath caught. In her hands lay a cross carved from dark walnut wood, its surface smooth as silk. Intricate patterns of vines and leaves flowed along its length, each detail speaking of hours of patient labor. "It is beautiful," she whispered, tracing the carvings with trembling fingers. "Like your heart," Tony said simply. "Strong and full of life, even after storm and fire." Tears gleamed in Chloe's eyes. "You saw worth in me when no one else would look. When I was marked and running, you offered shelter. When I was weak, you lent me strength." Her voice grew stronger. "God sent me to your door that night, I reckon, and every day since you have shown me what true faith looks like." The children had stopped singing to watch, their young faces solemn with understanding beyond their years. Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks, and two hawks nodded slowly, recognizing the sacred in this moment. Shall we step outside? Tony asked softly. The stars will be bright tonight. Together they walked to the porch, their friends following. The snow had stopped, leaving the world draped in pristine white. Above them, the sky glittered with countless stars, diamond bright in the crystal air. Chloe held the cross close to her heart and began to sing her grandmother's hymn. The melody rose pure and clear into the night, carrying hope on every note. To everyone's surprise, Tony's deep voice joined hers, steady and true. Though he had not sung since his wife's death, the music flowed from him naturally, as if it had simply waited for this moment. Their voices twined together, floating over snowy fields that would bloom come spring. Neither of them carried the broken shadows of the past anymore. Though scars remained, Tony's grief, Chloe's brands, they had been transformed by faith, courage, and the healing power of chosen family. The last notes faded into the vast Colorado night. Behind them, lamplight spilled from the farmhouse windows, creating pools of golden warmth on new-fallen snow. Children's laughter bubbled from inside, mixing with the murmur of conversation and clinking plates. Chloe and Tony stood together, watching that warm glow reach into the darkness. What had once been just a lonely farmstead now served as a beacon of hope on the frontier, a place where the wounded found healing, the lost found family, and faith lit the way forward for all who came seeking shelter. Thanks for being here. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a truth, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another moment that just might speak to your soul.